The winter of 1944 swallowed the Ardennes in white silence. Frost clung to the blackened trees like bone fingers, and the sky hung low and heavy, threatening more snow. Inside a half-frozen M10 Wolverine tank destroyer buried under camouflage netting, Private First Class Ray Thompson wiped a gloved hand across the fogged glass of his periscope. His breath came out in sharp clouds. The cold gnawed through his jacket and into his spine, but it wasn't fear that made his hands shake. It was the kind of winter that chewed through men. Across the valley, barely 800 yards away, steel shapes crawled through the trees, German armor. First one Panzer IV, then another, and at the front the unmistakable shape of a Tiger tank, its turrets slow and predatory. Behind them rolled half-tracks and fuel trucks, a full armored column carving a path toward a critical road that fed American defenses around Bastogne. If the enemy reached that crossroads, thousands of soldiers from the 101st Airborne would be cut off for good. No food, no ammunition, no escape. Thompson had been told to watch them pass. Nothing more. No firing. No engagement. Headquarters had gone silent hours ago, and without a direct command, he was just another set of eyes in a quiet war. He knew the rules: observe and report. Do not reveal your position. Do not fire unless ordered. But as he tracked the column, inching forward through the snow, a truth dug into his mind like shrapnel. If he didn't act now, no one would. Help wasn't coming. Orders weren't coming. He made his decision. Ray Thompson didn't ask permission. He didn't radio command. He didn't wait. He squeezed the trigger. And the war changed in a single shot. 3 days before that first unauthorized shot, Thompson sat inside an abandoned Belgian farmhouse that had been turned into a temporary command post. The wind blew through cracks in the walls, making maps flutter and men huddle deeper into their coats. A single lantern hung over a splintered table where the crew of the 702nd Tank Destroyer Battalion received their orders. "No one engages without confirmation from command," the briefing officer said. His voice carried no room for debate. "I don't care if you have a clean shot. I don't care if Jerry parks a tank right on your lap. You do not fire unless instructed." The room stayed quiet, but the unspoken friction was heavy. Every man there knew the front was collapsing. Reports were coming in by the hour, German armored divisions punching through the Ardennes, American units cut in half, entire regiments disappearing overnight. Radio lines were breaking down. Towns were changing hands twice a day. Nobody knew who was holding which line, or if those friendly vehicles coming over the hill were really friendly at all. The order made sense on paper. Don't give away your position. Don't draw artillery. Avoid friendly fire. But on the ground, where chaos replaced strategy, those rules felt like chains. For Thompson and his three-man crew, the mission was straightforward and miserable. Observe. Their Wolverine was dug into a frozen ridge overlooking a narrow road north of Neuville, perfectly camouflaged and perfectly useless. They had visibility. They had range. They had clear fields of fire. What they didn't have was permission to pull the trigger. Day after day, Thompson watched enemy movement through a frost-rimmed periscope. He tracked formations. He logged distances. He calculated wind and elevation. He wrote everything down in a small, battered notebook his mother had mailed him from Kansas. But he never fired. Once, a lone Panzer wandered across his sights, exposed, vulnerable, killable. He lined up the shot, waited for the order, and it never came. The tank rolled away, untouched. Thompson said nothing, but something hardened in him that day. He didn't doubt discipline. He didn't doubt caution. But he began to doubt the idea that waiting was always the safest option, because sometimes waiting didn't prevent disaster. Sometimes it invited it. Before Europe turned him into a gunner, Ray Thompson was just a farm kid from western Kansas, a place so flat you could watch your dog run away for 2 days. Winters out there didn't care much for human beings, and summers baked the land until the wheat fields split open like cracked pottery. His father, Charles Thompson, made a living repairing whatever engines the town could bring him: tractors, trucks, harvesters, anything with gears. His mother, Anna, taught 7th grade math and believed that every problem in life could be solved with patience and a pencil. Ray inherited both, the calm logic of his mother and the mechanical obsession of his father. When other boys skipped rocks, he calculated the angle. When they built slingshots, he redesigned his for range and accuracy. He didn't enlist because he dreamed of medals or glory. He wanted to study engineering, and the Army was the one ticket that could get him there. So in 1942, he signed his name, boarded a bus, and traded wheat fields for war. By the time he landed in Normandy 2 years later, he already looked like someone who had seen too much. Combat aged men faster than time, and the hedgerow country of France aged them fastest of all. The enemy could be 10 feet away and invisible until they opened fire. Thompson watched friends die without warning. Jimmy Delgado burned when a Panzer shell turned their half-track into a furnace. Frank Murray stepped on a mine and vanished before anyone knew he was gone. After that, Ray stopped believing in luck. He believed in patterns. He began studying enemy armor the way a surgeon studies anatomy. He learned how long a Panzer IV took to rotate its turret. He measured reload times by ear. He noted every vulnerability: weak side armor, ammo storage points, blind angles. He carried a small spiral notebook inside his jacket and filled it with hand-sketched diagrams and calculations. Other soldiers thought he was strange, quiet, cold, always counting. They called him the clock because everything he did seemed timed, measured, precise. But when it came to firing a gun, nobody doubted him. He didn't waste bullets. He didn't rush shots. He didn't miss. To most officers, he was just another disciplined gunner. What they didn't see, what no one saw, was the way Ray Thompson read battlefields like puzzles and solved them in real time. He could see the flow of combat, the invisible math behind movement and fire. And on that frozen ridge in the Ardennes, fate was about to hand him a problem no manual had prepared him to solve, and no officer had given him permission to answer.
Dawn on December 19th, 1944, looked more like twilight. A heavy fog lay low over the Ardennes, curling between the pines like smoke from an invisible fire. Sound didn't travel right. Everything felt distant, muffled, unreal. But through the periscope of his M10 Wolverine, Ray Thompson saw something all too real: a tiger. I emerged first, broad-shouldered, slow and terrifying. Even half hidden by mist, it looked like a moving bunker, a machine built to break men before it even fired. Then came 3 Panzer IVs behind it, their long barrels sweeping like watchful eyes. Half-tracks followed, packed with infantry. Behind them rolled ammunition carriers and fuel trucks, the nervous system of the column. Bringing up the rear was a self-propelled anti-aircraft gun, scanning the trees for threats that weren't supposed to be there. It was a perfect armored column, disciplined spacing, textbook formation, every piece in place. A formation like that in open terrain was nearly unstoppable. But this road was not open terrain. It was a narrow cut through dense timber, a frozen tunnel carved through pine and rock. There was no room to turn, no room to fan out, no room for mistakes. To most soldiers, that column would have looked like death rolling forward. But to Thompson, it looked like something else entirely, a pattern. He followed it from front to rear with his scope. Tiger for breakthrough, Panzers for support, infantry transport next, logistics last. German doctrine in motion, predictable, efficient, and vulnerable in the right hands. He checked his radio, static. There would be no contact with command, no updated orders, no reinforcements. Protocol said observe the enemy and wait. Call in artillery when contact was restored. Fall back if discovered. But Thompson knew artillery would come too late. If this column reached the crossroads at Nouville, they would outflank American lines, drive into the 101st Airborne from behind, and close the trap around Bastogne for good. Tens of thousands of Americans would be cut off. The battle would tilt, and it would not tilt back. The enemy wasn't just moving. They were hunting, closing in, confident. They were also wrong. They believed no American unit would dare engage them without overwhelming support. They believed no tank destroyer crew would break orders and fire alone. They believed no one was watching them. But someone was, and he had already begun solving the equation of their destruction. Ray Thompson had never pulled the trigger without orders, not once. Not in training, not in France, not even days earlier when a lone Panzer wandered across his scope like a gift from fate. He had discipline drilled into his bones. Orders were orders. But as that armored column crept into the killing ground below him, discipline became a luxury he could no longer afford. There was no hero's speech, no dramatic pause, just a decision, silent, absolute. He adjusted the elevation wheel, dialed in the range, let his sights settle where no manual ever told him to aim, and he fired. The Wolverine shook with a crack of violent thunder, the recoil slamming back like a fist. Snow blasted off the barrel and branches shuddered from the shockwave. But Thompson didn't target the Tiger in front. He didn't even fire at the first vehicle in line. His first shot punched straight into the 3rd Panzer IV, mid-column, right where the armor was weakest. The shell struck like a hammer from the gods, ripping through steel and ammunition. The explosion tore the tank open and sent its turret belching black smoke into the frozen air. The entire column lurched to a halt. Before the Germans could react, Thompson snapped into motion. "Load!" he called. His crew didn't argue. They didn't even fully understand what he was doing, but they knew why. The loader slammed the next shell into the breach. Thompson shifted the Wolverine 10 yards left, just enough to throw off anyone tracking the muzzle flash, and fired again. The second shell hit the 6th vehicle, a half-track loaded with infantry. Flames engulfed it instantly, and bodies were thrown like rag dolls into the snow. Screams echoed through the trees. Chaos detonated. The Tiger began to reverse, but there was nowhere to go. Vehicles were jammed bumper to bumper. Crewmen shouted commands, tried to reorganize, tried to find the enemy they couldn't see. Thompson was already moving again. "Up!" the loader yelled, jamming in another armor-piercing round. The Wolverine slid behind a fresh cluster of trees. Thompson drew a breath, calculated, fired. The 8th vehicle, a fuel truck, vanished in a fireball that roared up like a volcanic blast. Flames raced along the ground, licking at tires and treads. Shrapnel rained down through the branches like metallic hail. 3 shots, 3 kills, no orders. Thompson wasn't just firing. He was executing a pattern, a mathematically precise method of destruction designed to fracture the spine of a German assault column without firing a single wasteful round. Hit the 3rd vehicle, block forward movement. Hit the 6th, split the infantry support. Hit the 8th, ignite panic, and block retreat. He hadn't improvised it. He had planned it. The forest was no longer quiet. Flames chewed through pine branches as if the trees themselves had been soaked in gasoline. Metal clanged and screamed under pressure. Somewhere below, a German officer was shouting orders that no one could follow, because no one could see who was killing them. Thompson's crew worked like a living machine, no wasted movement, no hesitation. "Up! Fire! Up! Fire!" The Wolverine roared over and over, then vanished back into silence as Thompson repositioned. He never stayed still for more than a shot. After every round, he'd swing the tank destroyer behind a new tree line, giving the illusion of a hidden battery scattered across the woods. It wasn't luck keeping them alive. It was geometry. Every position was pre-calculated, every firing window rehearsed in his head. He shifted distances, manipulated angles, and used the terrain to bend German expectations until their response dissolved into blind panic. German mortars finally began to drop shells, but they were firing at ghosts. Explosions rocked the ridgeline, but the Wolverine was already gone. Thompson had predicted the delay in enemy artillery and moved before the shells even landed. A Panzer IV turned its turret toward where it thought a shot had come from, just as a high-velocity round punched through its frontal armor. The tank spasmed, burning from the inside as crewmen tried and failed to escape. The turret hatch flung open. but the man inside emerged as a human torch and collapsed beside the tread. Another target, then another. Every time the Germans tried to form a defensive line, Thompson shattered it with a single round. Every time they attempted to reverse, he cut down their retreat. Every time they paused to regroup, he smashed them again. He was no longer just attacking the column. He was dismantling their will to fight. Jesus Christ, the loader muttered between shells, sweating in the frozen air. Nobody's going to believe this. Thompson didn't answer. He didn't even blink. There was no glory in his expression, no triumph, just relentless concentration, the cold calculation of a man who had decided that today would not be the day he died and was willing to kill anything that tried to argue otherwise. Smoke swallowed the valley. Flames danced wild among shattered machines, and somewhere inside that chaos, German soldiers began to shout a single word into the trees. Unsichtbar, unsichtbar, invisible. They thought they were fighting one man. They had no idea he was about to break them completely. From the German side, it made no sense. Artillery? Impossible. No whistling shells, no arcing trajectories. Infantry ambush? No. Their enemy struck from range with impossible precision. A full American anti-tank company? Couldn't be. There was only one gun firing at a time, yet vehicles were erupting one after another. Columns were splitting. Attempts to flank were obliterated before they even formed. The battlefield had turned into a slaughterhouse run by an invisible executioner. Inside the Tiger tank at the front of the column, the commander slammed his fist against the side of the turret. Wo sind sie? Findet sie? Where are they? Find them. But his crew couldn't find what wasn't there. No muzzle flashes, no engine sound long enough to track. Each attack came from a different angle. Each round struck a kill point like it had eyes. Down the line, surviving infantry scattered for the tree line, firing at shadows, riddling the woods with hopeless bursts of MG-42 fire. They shouted positions that contradicted each other. Shots from the North Ridge. No, from the West Slope. They're behind us. They weren't arguing. They were all telling the truth. Because Ray Thompson kept moving, staying everywhere and nowhere at once. To the German artillery commander, the pattern became something else entirely, not random, not chaotic, choreographed. Every hit crippled movement, every fireball slowed recovery. He stared at the burning column and shook his head in disbelief. Das ist kein Zufall. Das ist Strategie. This isn't chance. This is strategy. Word spread fast down the frozen line. Geister Batterie. The Ghost Batterie.
Somewhere in those woods, the Germans decided there had to be a hardened American defensive position, camouflaged bunkers, entrenched anti-tank guns, maybe even forward artillery spotters guiding hidden howitzers. That had to be the answer, because the alternative, that one man had just pinned and dismantled a veteran armored column, that was unthinkable. But as panic climbed and engines burned, something darker began to spread among German troops. Fear, not the fear of death. That was familiar to them. This was worse. It was the terror of being hunted by something you couldn't see. Back at the American line, Thompson's Wolverine had vanished from the map hours ago. No radio communication, no support requests, no fallback maneuver. He simply drove into enemy territory and did the one thing every soldier in the Ardennes was ordered not to do: engage the enemy without permission. To headquarters, Ray Thompson wasn't a hero. He was a problem. A lieutenant at Battalion HQ slammed his clipboard down. Who the hell does he think he is? We gave a hold fire order. No engagement and no movement until intel comes in. Get me his CO now. But Thompson's commanding officer wasn't celebrating either. He was pacing, furious. That idiot just gave away our position. If the Germans zero in on him and trace fire back to our sector, they'll flatten us before sundown. What possessed him to open fire? No one had an answer. In the command tent, maps were spread across a folding table. division markers, artillery grids, fallback routes. None of them accounted for one rogue Wolverine tearing apart a German spearhead by himself. If he survived, he'd be facing a court-martial, insubordination, disobeying direct orders, maybe even reckless endangerment of U.S. Army personnel. But the frontline troops didn't care about war room politics. They heard the distant booms, saw the plumes of smoke on the horizon, knew someone out there was taking the fight to the Germans. And in a war that had been defined by retreat after retreat through the Ardennes, something changed. Men stopped muttering about pulling back. They stopped talking like they were already beaten. They stood a little straighter. One soldier watched the horizon and said quietly, "That's got to be Thompson. Who else would be crazy enough?" Another grinned. "Hope he buys us enough time to dig in." The truth was brutally simple. Thompson had broken the rules. But he was buying lives with every unauthorized shot. Hours passed before the gun finally fell silent. The forest was a graveyard now. Blackened steel hulks lay scattered like tombstones, smoke curling into a sky choked by winter and war. The snow had turned gray with ash. Engines still hissed where fire had eaten through metal. Ammunition still popped in the heat like distant fireworks. In the center of that devastation sat a single American Wolverine, out of shells, out of fuel, and somehow still alive. Ray Thompson stepped down from the turret, boots crunching over spent casings and broken branches. His face was streaked with soot. His coat was torn. He looked less like a soldier and more like something carved by the battle itself, silent, grim, unshaken. Behind him, the rest of his crew climbed down, dazed by what they had survived. None of them spoke. There were no cheers, no handshakes, no celebration. Just the quiet understanding that they had done something no one would ever fully believe. They had stopped an armored assault with a single gun. American reinforcements eventually arrived, scanning the frozen valley in disbelief. "Where's the rest of your unit?" a sergeant asked. Thompson just nodded at the Wolverine. "You're looking at it." History would argue about him. Some officers called him reckless. Others wanted him stripped of rank. But the frontline soldiers, the ones who saw the smoke, heard the cannon, and lived because the German advance died in those woods, they had another word for him: savior. He didn't do it for glory. He didn't do it for medals. He did it because nobody else would, because sometimes the only way to hold the line is to ignore the rule book and trust your gut. That day in the Ardennes, Ray Thompson didn't just fight the enemy. He outthought them. He outmaneuvered them. And when it mattered most, he refused to quit. Most people will never know his name. But every soldier who walked away from that ridgeline carried his legacy forward. Sometimes it only takes one man to change the course of a battle.